All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. People will continue to come in for the next few minutes. But welcome to Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy's Ambassador John Price and Marcia Price World Affairs Lecture Series. My name is Emma Russell, and I'm the Events and Outreach Director at UCCD. I want to begin by thanking all of you for attending tonight's virtual lecture, Diplomacy in National Parks. Amidst the stress of COVID, nature has become a solace for many. I am thrilled that we are able to host a lecture focusing on national parks because it's a clear example of our guiding principle, citizen diplomacy. UCCD is driven by the concept that we all have the right and responsibility to help shape foreign relations, and tonight, as it relates to national parks, we will continue to do this one handshake at a time. Now, I know you guys are eager to hear Christine speak, but before we welcome her, I have a few announcements and housekeeping items. To begin, there are a few Zoom guidelines. We have chosen to host this lecture in a meeting style rather than a webinar to create a sense of community. You're invited to keep your video cameras on so that we can see you all as an audience. However, please know that we will be recording this lecture. We also ask that everyone remains muted throughout the lecture to prevent any background noise. Lastly, we encourage everyone to use the chat feature of this Zoom meeting to ask questions or add comments. I will periodically attach links or additional information in the chat as well. After Christine's lecture, we will conduct a question and answer session. There are two ways that you can participate. First, you're invited to use the chat box feature to post your question throughout the lecture. Kelly Bricker, our facilitator for this lecture, will then address your questions during the Q&A. Alternatively, if your video camera is on during the question and answer session, you can physically raise your hand and we will call on you to state your question. We ask that you please keep your questions short and direct and avoid making statements so that we can get to as many questions as possible. Although in-person events continue to be suspended, UCCD is committed to providing the same high-quality programming and events virtually. I want to invite all of you to learn more about UCCD as we have some really exciting events upcoming. Today is only the first of our 4 lectures in our Fall 2020 World Affairs Lecture Series. Our next lecture is Female Genital Mutilation in America, with a focus on how storytelling can fuel social movements. This will be presented by Miriam Safi, FGM survivor and women's rights activist. This incredible lecture will be on Tuesday, October 6th at 7 p.m. Additionally, we are beginning a new fireside chat series inspired by a series of evening radio addresses given by US President Franklin D. Roosevelt, where he would quell rumors and explain his policies. These chats are short conversations with Utah citizen diplomats who are reformulating the American worldview from one of despair to one of hope during a time of multiple crises. These 30 to 40-minute long segments will be discussion-based, where a small group of participants can engage with the speaker. Fireside chats are really intended to create an intimate conversation between the audience and the speaker. Our first chat will be held with Gerald Elias, an internationally acclaimed musician and award-winning author. He will lead a fascinating discussion on the importance of music in diplomacy. We still have a few spots available, and I encourage you to join us for this empowering conversation. If either of these events interests you, I'll be attaching a link in the chat box. I also want to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors, Ambassador John Price and Marcia Price, for their commitment to diplomacy through our World Affairs Lecture Series, Salt Lake City Mayor Erin Mendenhall and her Arts, Culture, and Events Fund that supports our lecture series, Westminster College and President Dobkin for their continuous support and partnership, World Affairs Council of America for the incredible support network of partners around the United States, and the residents of Salt Lake County for their continued support of arts, culture, and recreation through the Salt Lake County Zoo, Arts, and Parks ZAP program, in which our lecture series is a recipient. Now I am pleased to invite Kelly Bricker, Professor and Chair in the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Tourism in the University of Utah's College of Health, to introduce tonight's guest speaker, as well as facilitate the Q&A portion of tonight's program. Thank you so much for joining us, Kelly.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for taking care of the house tonight. We really appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. To begin, we acknowledge that we share this time together situated on traditional and ancestral lands of the Shoshone, Paiute, Goshute, and Ute tribes, as well as other indigenous peoples who have traditionally and continue to be the original peoples and stewards of this land throughout time immemorial. We acknowledge the existing sovereignty of tribes, including those in Utah, the Confederated Tribes of the Goshu Reservation, Navajo Nation, Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation, Paiute, Indian Tribe of Utah, San Juan, Southern Paiute, Skull Valley Band of Goshu, Ute Mountain Ute Tribe, and Ute Indian Tribe. As today, please join us in reflecting upon the ongoing manifestations of both the colonization and survivance in landscapes around each of us. As visitors upon this land, we respect Indigenous communities past, present, and future, and recognize them as the original stewards of this land. In learning about the historical connections between national parks and democracy, we should also commit ourselves to the contemporary pursuit of more reciprocal and decolonized landscapes. So in the presentation this evening, Christine will highlight several NPS sites with connections to diplomacy. She will provide information on ways to more effectively engage with the NPS mission and other resources, especially parks during this period of physical distancing. The NPS's mission is to preserve unimpaired the natural and cultural resources and values of the national park system for the enjoyment, education, and inspiration of this and future generations. And she hopes to encourage audience members to plan virtual and future in-person visits to the many inspiring units our Park Service offers. And now for our lecturer, just to give a brief background on who will be guiding us through this talk this evening. Christine Dow-Bello joined the U.S. Department of State in 2001 and has spent the last year on a sabbatical fellowship thanks to the generosity of the Una Chapman Cox Foundation and the department. Her journey to 29 states and 2 U.S. territories allowed her to visit more than 85 units of the National Park Service to promote the importance of historical, cultural, and natural preservation. As part of her fellowship, she became a certified California naturalist and a certified interpretive guide. She and her 2 children, who accompanied her on her journey, host a podcast, Expedition National Parks, to encourage listeners to engage with these less known and appreciated sites and histories. Christine has had the privilege to serve her country as a Foreign Service officer in Abu Dhabi, UAE, Mumbai, India, Vienna, Austria, Kabul, Afghanistan, and Jakarta, Indonesia, as well as in the Washington, D.C. office as a foreign policy advisor in the U.S. Senate. Her most recent overseas assignment was Public Affairs Officer in Dubai from 2016 to 2019, where managing the International Visitor Leadership Program for her post was one of the highlights of her job. Please join me in welcoming Christine.
I was like, thank you very much. It's always so odd, this virtual kind of platform, though obviously we're all getting used to it. And thank you, Felicia and Emma and the whole Utah diplomacy team. It's just a real honor because, in many ways, Utah is so known for its national parks. Of course, my home state of California as well. I think we might have more units, but we're also bigger. So I just want to start by saying how much I appreciate the work that all of you do. Not just those who serve on the board or with Utah diplomacy, but also you as citizen diplomats and activists. As I mentioned, or as Kelly mentioned, working with the International Visitor Leadership program was such a highlight when I've been overseas. We get to recruit them, we get to, brief them, but we don't actually get to go with them to the United States to see, what they experience. Of course, when they come back, we get to hear all about it. And, they always, are so enthusiastic about the home hospitality and the cultural places that they were able to visit during the trip. So, I mean, it really does have an impact. And right now, we're not seeing as many international visitors, of course, in the United States, like not just like IVLPs, but just because of the pandemic and tourists. But I mean, I encourage you all, when you're out in the national parks, when things are kind of more back to normal, or the new normal, and travel is allowed again, to engage always like with international tourists, because when we're overseas and we're foreign tourists in another country, we always learn so much about the culture and the people from the people there. And my kids are always annoyed at me because I try to engage people when I like to talk to people. And right now we just moved to a new country. We're in Belgium, and we've only been here like a few weeks. So we're, COVID, restrictions and being careful, we're going out, and we did a cleanup on as part of, I think it was World Cleanup Day on Sunday. And my kids are always like, they're so annoying. You're so annoying. Like, stop talking to them. They're annoyed by you talking to them. I said, well, then they'll not talk to us and we'll move on. But like, I mean, it's just important to kind of, start those conversations for us all to learn. So thank you again. And also I want to kind of, mention at the outset, I would love to hear your stories and your suggestions on places that are connected to diplomacy. Because I did another one of these presentations just last week, and I got a great story about President Carter bringing Sadat and Begin to Gettysburg, the battlefield, like in the midst of the negotiations, and how pivotal that was. So I didn't know about it. And I find that when you visit these places, or you come into contact with people who have a more direct connection, it leads to more discoveries. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. Before I do, actually, Brussels is one of the most green capitals in Europe, which I've learned about. And these are, redwoods behind me. And there is a connection to where I am currently, because we went to a great botanical garden on the weekend, and there was a big California redwood tree there. And that was another thing. I was like, how did it get here? Why did it get, and so that's something still to explore. But I put it back there because the backdrop that I have, and that Kelly had, that both of us have, that's what people think of when they think of national parks. These kind of really sweeping landscapes, these majestic scenes. But there are so many more parks that don't look like this. This is Muir Woods behind me. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see it? Okay, there we go. So I'm just starting off with, of course, some familiar scenes for you. So I should say that I started this year a year ago, it's almost exactly a year, like I was in Washington at this time. And my plan had been to do kind of the more far-flung states and areas first. So we went to Hawaii, and also the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Caribbean, and then the idea was to do a really long road trip in the spring. And unfortunately, because of COVID, that didn't actually come to pass. But we were locked down and quarantining with my family in California. But then we went to visit my husband's family in Texas, and so I was like, it's safer to drive. Let's drive. And so we were able to kind of squeeze in some sites, including some in Utah. This is, of course, Zion. This is actually will always be remembered in my family. I actually have 4 kids, only 2 of whom joined on the trip because they were older, and my younger one stayed with my husband. you know, we knew that the river was kind of fast flowing, and we were just, you know, having fun in the river. And my daughter like threw a hat when she shouldn't have, and she kind of went in for it, and she kind of started going, you know, downstream, and I was just kind of there on the side, and I like plunged in, and so it was you know, it all ended well. So we have like an amazing story. And another reminder about how you can never take things for granted outdoors. You always have to be very aware. So it was a good lesson on many counts. We got to Zion at a very unusual time in the sense it wasn't that crowded, because it was just kind of in the kind of that time period between kind of being closed and kind of reopening, and the shuttle buses hadn't started, and we were able to get a last minute reservation for the lodge. So we were very lucky, because this is, I think, the most visited park in Utah, because I think it's so much of it comes from geography. Like the Smoky Mountains is, I think, the most visited park in the United States, because 50% of the country lives within a day's drive, and it's similar for Zion. It's I think 20 million people from Southern California can access it within 7 hours. Sorry, where is it? Okay. That's Cedar Breaks. And it's a national monument, and it's only an hour away. And I kept all the poor people that, you know, had come to like Zion and couldn't get in because of the shuttle bus. I'm like, it's only an hour away, you know? So there's so many different places to see. This was interesting because we actually, a ranger from Fort Point in the Bay Area recognized us, and I recognized her when she said it, because she gave us a tour at Fort Point in like February. And that's there's a lot of since it's very seasonal, there's people who kind of moved from park to park. Of course, Bryce. These are, you know, this doesn't do Arches justice, and we were just literally zooming through at the end of the day, and that's Capitol Reef. You can see my son looks so excited. And so these are just, you know, some, we did go to a lot of that kind of the well-known parks. This is Old Faithful, winter in Yellowstone. And I have to say, I'm not a winter person, but it was really magical. Someone kind of had compared it to being in a snow globe, and it was really special. This is actually a flag we made of our logo. And then almost exactly a year ago, this is Thunder Hole in Acadia National Park. We got a little drenched there. Oops, why is it not? Bubble Rock, fall foliage season. So we kind of were able to visit, you know, during some iconic places. But what I'd really kind of had aimed for during this trip was to kind of target the parks that were less visited and that had more overlooked, you know, pieces of history, as well as those connected to diplomacy. So I had a few in mind that I'd gotten through kind of a presentation. They were Jimmy Carter National Historic Site, the San Juan Islands, which I never made it to because I was supposed to do it in the spring, and Eisenhower National Historic Site. I did make it there literally a year ago. They have like a World War II kind of reenactment, and we made it for that. Though we did not make it to the battlefield because we were supposed to go back the next day, and our tour got canceled. So the idea was to go to these smaller parks, less known, and learn. And every time I go to one of these parks, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I didn't know about this. And it's like there's like a long list of books after kind of each trip. And so I more and more focused in on the ones with connections to diplomacy, because there were actually more than I expected. And I kind of came up with a couple of themes, I would say, or categories that these sites would fall into. But this is something still kind of dynamic, and I'm kind of still thinking about. It's not like, you know, I didn't get to explore all of them. And that's the beauty, like they're protected, right? So I don't, you know, I was very lucky to be in a safe place with my family during the quarantine. And, you know, I didn't go to plan. I didn't get to go to all the places I wanted to go to. I still have only managed to make it to 46 states. You know, I missed those last 4. But you know, all these other parks, they'll be there, they'll be protected. And, you know, I was reminded of that. There's a lot of national parks, Facebook groups and social media kind of place, you know, platforms where they exchange photos and stories. And someone posted a photo of the Badlands from like 1958, I think it was, that his father had taken. And then he went back to the same site and he, you know, shared them side by side. And of course, you know, there was erosion and there was, you know, changes, but like it was still pretty much the same. So we're very lucky, you know, to have these parks. And as one ranger in the Everglades told us, he spent like 2.5 hours with us. It was an amazing program. And, you know, we were thanking him, but he was thanking us, you know, as owners of this, of the land, that we'd come to like check to make sure that they were taking care of it properly. And I think that's a pretty amazing idea, you know, America's greatest idea. And that's something that, you know, continues to impress me. And also a lot of, you know, foreign visitors, of course. This is Haleakala. So this gives you an idea of the 420. It was just changed a few days ago with the addition of Eisenhower Memorial in Washington, D.C. So now there are 420. So I have to, if I slip up and say 419, you'll understand why. But that leaves 358 other units of the system. And you can see kind of at the top, the abbreviations for the different units. So the three categories I'm going to be kind of discussing tonight. The first one is how nature's beauty can inspire individuals to be their best selves and strive for cooperation and peace. And the first park is Grand Teton National Park, which unfortunately I didn't make it to. I tried to during the winter, and I was like, it's too dangerous, like weather-wise, to make it, even though they're so close. And this is actually something I heard about when I was at the State Department a year ago. Someone's like, did you see that photo in the exhibit? And it was a variation of like this photo of Foreign Minister Shevardnadze and Secretary of State Baker, who met at Grand Teton itself for like a pre-summit meeting. And it was described by the New York Times as more productive than most of the meetings between American and Soviet foreign ministers in recent years. More progress is made here on arms control than at the Moscow summit meeting last year between President Ronald Reagan and President Gorbachev. So, you know, it's hard to kind of, you know, find the exact cause, but what I heard about this event was that it was a very successful one. They spent a lot of time in nature. They went fishing together. They talked a lot about their families. So it can break down those barriers and lead to more productive discussions. Oops. I'm missing a photo, but that's okay because it's basically this is Muir Woods now, which is behind me, and I went there and, you know, just asked like one of the volunteers or the rangers, or, you know, a little bit about my project, and they're saying, oh, you have to go to Cathedral Grove, and there's a very direct connection. So I will now show you a little video that kind of captures this a bit better.
I don't think we have sound on our side, Christine.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'll just stop it 1 sec. Okay. Oh, sorry. Well, I'll try to do my best. It won't be as beautiful as that. But that was actually the voice of Mia Monroe. She is a ranger with the Golden Gate National Recreation Area, and has worked at Muir Woods in the past. So she's talking about how Muir Woods was the site of unfortunately, it was meant to be kind of like a place for the delegates. Sorry, I have to go back in time because that was going to be the introduction. San Francisco in 1945 was the site of the UN Charter Conference. Like there was like 850 delegates that came from around the world, and they worked over 2 months to negotiate and conclude the document. You know, it wasn't a given that they would get to that point. And the Secretary of the Interior, as you see in this letter to President Roosevelt, had proposed that they bring the delegates to Muir Woods to give them, to kind of motivate them to that they would gain a perspective and a sense of, let me just read it, a sense of time that could be obtained nowhere in America better than in one of such forests. So they did come in May. Let's see, it started in April. The event was in May, and then they signed the charter in June. And unfortunately, what was just going to be kind of more of a contemplative event, you know, focused on the charter and their work, ended up being a memorial service for President Roosevelt. But as the video said, you know, one of the first actions that President Truman took was to, you know, when he assumed office, was to ensure that the charter conference would continue, because that was such an important, it was so important to not just the United States, but to the world. So another place the second category is that some sites I found commemorate places, and the purpose of that is to celebrate the peaceful resolution of a conflict through diplomacy. And I found this nowhere better, and you know, I didn't get to every site, so there might be more, than Chamizal National Memorial in El Paso, Texas. We got there on a rainy day, as you can see, and there had been a border dispute that had gone on for, you know, close to 100 years, because the border boundary was the Rio Grande, and it shifted, and so there were these, you know, kind of, it had simmered for a long time and never kind of achieved conclusion. And President Kennedy, if I'm remembering correctly, went to Mexico, met with the president, and they decided that this was something that they, you know, were going to concentrate efforts on. President Kennedy, unfortunately, didn't see it come to realization, but President Johnson did. My pictures are out of order. Sorry about that.
I'm still looking at the paused video, Christine.
Oh, I'm sorry. Why? It's on my screen. Oh, sorry. Let me go. There you go. Can you see it now? Sorry, thank you for telling me. Okay, now this is the boundary, one of the old boundary markers. And it is a very unusual park because it is like a performing arts center, and it's meant to really celebrate the kind of the two nations, the two cultures, our friendship. Of course, now it's very difficult because of COVID. And this is a scene from the final. They had a black box apparently, which they pressed because they had to kind of build a channel for the river. And the black box, they pressed the button, and then the water started flowing. But this was like kind of unveiling the kind of commemorative statue. And then in the visitor center, you can recreate the scene. So once again, my son not looking very happy. There's like a trend. And then there's sites that I found celebrated history-making individuals, including those with success in the diplomatic sphere. And often I didn't know that there was any connection to the diplomatic sphere until I actually visited. This was the Frederick Douglass National Historic Site. He was, you know, basically our ambassador to Haiti. This is an artistic rendering. So he was many things: abolitionist, suffragist, author, editor, but also order. They actually at that site they also have an oration contest for children, because that was something that was he was so skilled in. And that's his home, Cedar Hill, just outside Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. has an amazing concentration, of course, many small ones. So for those park enthusiasts, there's like a lot of people who like to visit as many as possible, either the 62 or all 420, and they can always get a large number when they come to Washington. Then there was Clara Barton National Historic Site. It was one, you know, it was in DC and it was kind of close by. So I didn't know what to expect. And it actually, it's her former home, but it was also the headquarters of the American Red Cross. And it was just by reading a sign outside that I learned that she was in Europe and heard about the Red Cross. And then she became aware of its, potential benefits to Americans. And so she sought to convince the U.S. of the importance of the organization and to adopt the principles for which it stood. And so in 1881, she founded the American Red Cross, and one of the Red Cross's first goals was to secure the ratification of the Geneva Convention by the U.S. And she worked to that and lobbied the Senate. Then this third site was one I actually visited on a previous trip before I kind of started this year-long adventure. We had done two much shorter, like 1 week, 10-day trips with my kids again, because I realized that growing up in California and having worked, in DC, I hadn't really visited that much of, the rest of the country. And my children were at a camp in West Virginia. So I knew the starting point and then decided, different routes. And I wasn't even focusing on national parks. I was just like beginning and end, and then I was going to fill it in. And I did think that I wanted one big national park. See, once again, the national park name, and it was Mammoth Cave. So we ended up going there and then finishing in Nashville. But, just along the route, I saw some other places, and we went to Hopewell Culture, which is in Ohio. And I was like, wow, I can't believe I didn't know about, the people that live there, what they did on the land. And also that there's so many of these parks that I didn't know about, and that I didn't even think to look for. And so that same summer, I was like, I was bitten by the bug. I was like, I want to visit more parks. And we were visiting friends in Vermont, and there aren't that many in that immediate area. So we went to two, one in New Hampshire and then this one in Vermont. It's Marsh Billings Rockefeller National Historic Park. And George Perkin Marsh, his boyhood home is kind of the centerpiece of the park. And he's the father of the conservation movement. He was very influenced by what he saw growing up around him in Vermont. There was a lot of deforestation, which led to erosion and impact on the land. And then he became our ambassador to Italy, or our minister, but basically our ambassador to Italy for 21 years. And he was very much influenced by what he saw there. He saw the impact of European deforestation and how Europeans were trying to respond with land management plans. And both of these experiences, many others, impacted his thinking and writing. And his seminal work, Man and Nature, was published in 1864, and was influential in changing people's perceptions of the relationship between humans and the land. And this is his boyhood home. So then, Utah, I know you're all very familiar with especially the Mighty Five, and so I don't have to kind of tell you that, but you might not know that, can you see it at the very bottom? Zion has a sister park relationship with a park in China. And this is kind of run through the Office of International Affairs in the National Park Service. And we are very much kind of engaged, not just the National Park Service, the State Department as well, engages on these issues. We have a Bureau of Ocean Environment and Science, and we also, for example, when I was in Dubai with the Foreign Commercial Service representative and other sections in the embassy, and it was at the embassy and consulate, it was a mission-wide effort. We had something called Discover America, where we were promoting the U.S., including education and tourism, which were more kind of in the public affairs area. And we invited through State Department and the Office of International Affairs, a National Park Service representative to come, and in uniform. So he met with many stakeholders in the UAE, but also kind of was like a keynote speaker at a IMAX movie presentation of National Parks movie. So this is one of something the Office of International Affairs works on, sister parks. And they do also consultation and training, and I mentioned the State Department programs. So I always find that the National Park Service website is it's not revolutionary, right, to go to the NPS website, but they have a great, I find it, seeing this visual that seeing the whole map of the US, like when you're planning a trip, you can kind of, add places that might be along the way. And they have a great kind of overview of each park, and then links, of course. And whether you're doing this virtually or in person, you go to the website of the park. They'll have all the COVID, differences, different hours, etc. They'll have junior ranger programs, educational resources. There's also like a whole section of the overall website where you can get, curriculum, lesson plans, etc. And you can delineate via, if you wanted a math lesson, science lesson, social studies, etc. So these are the ones in Utah. So there's a lot of attention to the 5 parks, but I didn't get to go to that many of them. But the Golden Spike National Historic Park, this year they just issued a new junior ranger program on railroad. It's called the Railroad Explorer. And then there's 599 national natural landmarks, and there's only 4 in Utah, but that's because I think that so many are already protected through the national park system. But I mean, we can't forget about the public lands in general. So we kind of focus, and I'm part of the problem, right? I focused my project on national parks, but then there's so many other public lands to discover: city parks, state parks, Bureau of Land Management, Forest Service. So when you are visiting during, the pandemic, it's very important to be prepared. Distance. They kind of have a hashtag campaign, Recreate Responsibly. I encourage everyone of all ages to do the Junior Ranger program. This one is from Catoctin Mountain Park, and also Diplomatic Connection because it's the site of Camp David. That's the Railroad Explorer. I encourage people to buy the passport. Not every, it gives you an overview and like a little blurb on everyone, and you can kind of collect stamps, record your progress. There's a bigger version. Some people are very into this, and there's actually something called the National Parks Traveler Club, where they have like a data bank that shows all the different stamps, so you can check that, make sure you've gotten all of them. They do special awards for people who've gone to all 420. The Junior Ranger program is still active even during COVID. They're getting sworn in, distance there. I often was deputized to do it. These Junior Ranger programs are a great way to kind of, they're like activity booklets. They're designed for kids, but often they sometimes have adult programs, but even the adults can learn from the kids' booklets, because unless you know a lot about the site, you're still going to learn. You earn a nice little badge. This is the podcast that she mentioned earlier. So the last 2 podcast episodes, this one's the second to last, was on kind of international exchange or diplomacy topics. Summer work travel program, which is a J1 visa. And then this last one was on Chamizal National Memorial. So thank you very much. Sorry for all the technical glitches. I actually started so I look forward to your questions and any suggestions that you have on places that you feel that there's connections to diplomacy, and whatever your interpretation of that is, because there's different interpretations. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. We're all clapping virtually. So we would like to open it up for questions. And as Emma mentioned earlier, you're welcome to put your question in the chat, or we'll try and find you if you have your hand raised. But I thought maybe I'll kick it off to kind of warm the audience up to question and answer. So you've had some amazing experiences with your children, and tell us about their impressions of the parks. Did you work those into your podcast? I'm definitely going to get on board with your podcast, but can you tell us about what they were thinking as they visited some of these, especially off the beaten path places?
Yeah. No, I think that it was harder for them to articulate. And, I don't know if it's the parent-child thing, like sometimes what you want, when you want to engage, they're not ready to engage. But I think that they really saw how complex our history is, how much we have to still learn from our history, and how much we still have to learn. And, they also had some very fun experiences, as well. And that I'm still, they're still not as avid fans of hiking or camping as I like them to be, but we'll continue that. And I think that I look at back at it myself, with trips that I took with my parents, and often you don't really, it's kind of, I'm hoping it's kind of there, and it'll reveal itself as they get older and as they become adults as well, that they'll kind of unpeel the different layers of it. Because I know that I had different perspectives, from different points in time of my journey.
Great. So Felicia has a question.
Yeah, so, and it might be a little bit of a touchy question because you're a foreign service officer, representative of the government. But, coming from Utah Council for Citizen Diplomacy, we recognize how valuable these non-traditional diplomacy approaches are. For us, it is people-to-people diplomacy. For this project, it's national parks diplomacy. How can we, as everyday citizens, protect these diplomatic resources when it seems like there is always the group of individuals that want to quiet that voice, if that makes sense?
Right. And this is actually something kind of that's related to national parks as well, that there's been quite a debate or realization about the lack of diversity in the national parks. And so even though that they're as popular as ever, they're still, overwhelmingly white visitors, and there's lack of diversity both in terms of the visitors as well as staff. And that's something that, needs to be looked at. And some people will make the point, it's also for the long-term survival of the parks as the demographic shift. They're your constituents, right? Like by visiting the national parks, we are sending a message. So I think that that's the same thing when it comes, to diplomacy. By becoming engaged in organizations such as yours, and all variants of that, right? Like the sister city programs. I'm not sure if some councils run that as well. That stay engaged and also do the normal citizen activist things, writing to your representatives. But I think that by doing, you're also sending a message, and that can have an effect. So I see kind of a parallel between the parks and diplomacy. I mean, it is, yes, admittedly harder, but but there are, you know, as I can see through your organization, there are ways to do it.
Thank you, Christine. We have a question about asking, what is your perspective on what can be done about the private land grabs on public lands? Natalie watched a documentary and it really opened her eyes to this issue.
Yeah, no, and I've seen, I mean, I think we drove through some of the parts because the thing is, there are different levels of protection of the parks, and some are meant to be, you know, like the forest, like depend, you know, to be used, to be utilized. So I think that's, once again, I mean, sorry, not to, you know, that to be active, to understand it, because I think a lot of people, you know, don't, including myself. There's still so much more I need to learn about it. I mean, for me, it was actually more of a puzzle. Like I was like, I knew about national parks, and then and I know city and state and county, and you know that it all exists, but then you don't realize, like, how do they all kind of like fit together? And then something I didn't realize until I was there's a lot of public you know, land trusts that where people have come together to kind of, you know, purchase, or, you know, somebody with bigger resources or whatever. So it's not a patchwork in the kind of, there are just so many, we have a big country, and there's so many ways that it's protected or semi-protected. And so becoming familiar with that, and being engaged with the entities that oversee it. And there's a lot of different organizations, and I'm sure some of the people on the call are involved in those organizations that, you know, whose mission it is to protect or lobby or advocate. You know, there's so looking for those and finding more resources that way, and, you know, ways to engage if that's what that person wants to do.
We have another question, and then I will get to the hand raise question in just a second. In your experience, how does national park diplomacy strengthen diplomatic ties with diverse communities within our own country? Going back to the diversity aspect of what you had mentioned earlier.
Right, and I think that so one project that I'm not sure if it's the National Park Foundation, so don't quote me or anything, but they started a program called Every Kid in a Park, and one flagship was that every fourth grader gets has access to a free national park pass. And the idea is that fourth grader will then bring his or her family, like that. It's their pass for them to bring, so that they're empowered to do it. And I think that there's, once again, like different organizations working on it. So for example, I have been working with, a group of us came together, different, like some are podcasters, some are bloggers, some are whatever, you know, different kind of content creators, to come together and highlight the organizations that are working to improve, you know, representation. So the way that I guess we kind of came to consensus was to kind of highlight an organization every month that is engaged in that space. So for example, this month it was Soul Track Outdoors, that's based in DC, and they're trying to kind of reverse I think that the statistic is 7% of NPS visitors are Black. In this case, but this kind of goes to other communities as well. And you know, they're 13% of the population. So they run different classes and events and things to get people outdoors. So and then one thing that we've also tried to do is support the efforts from different groups and organizations. And there's been like a great kind of flowering, like through like the lockdown. First there was like Black Birders Week, and it was, you know, all online, but they had the platform of the Audubon Society for one of their launch events, and it really went viral. And then there was like recently Black Mammalogists Week and like Black in National Parks Week from someone who'd been involved in Black Birders Week, and she's like on the Next Generation Council. So I think there's a, you know, depending on where you are, there's a lot of different ways to engage. As a visitor, you know, encourage, and this is something like, even though there's underrepresented groups in general, I think that there's a lack of understanding of like how much our national parks have to offer. And not just camping, not just hiking, you know, people engage with the outdoors in a lot of different ways. So the National Parks Service has something for everyone, you know, so engage your friends and family, and, you know, like, what about this park or what about that park? And even if they're, you know, home for COVID, because of COVID, you know, like there's virtual programming. So there's a lot of different ways. And then supporting organizations like Soul Track Outdoors, like, you know, Outdoor Afro, you know, just getting involved in supporting them. And depending on where you're at, you know, you have more maybe power or leadership, and, you know, in terms of getting engaged. But I think I was just at, I think I met, it's the 99th birthday of Betty Reed Soskin, who's the oldest ranger in the National Park Service. And she's based out of the Rosie the River World War II Homefront Museum. And for her birthday, she teamed up with a local literacy group, adult literacy, running out of a public library. And, you know, but so her, like, she was saying, you know, for my birthday, I want you to, you know, to vote. I want you to bring, you know, get other people, check in with your family. And it's the same thing with like so many of these issues, not just voting, but like the kind of representation. And going back to what you'd mentioned earlier about, you know, acknowledging the, you know, the natives that were, you know, in the space before. I see now, for example, a lot of the parks posts that I see, people do an indigenous land acknowledgement, you know, and people. So I mean, even when you're just posting on social media, there's ways to kind of make it to be more of a force for education, a force for kind of information.
Great. Just checking to see if we had any hands raised. I thought I saw one earlier. If there's anyone that would just like to ask. Okay, I'll go to another question. This is a little bit longer. Indonesia has just about as many national parks as the US, about 52, but most of their parks are what this individual is calling paper parks. And they're 100 years behind the US and not in a place politically and economically to steer the management into a sustainable place for both natural systems as well as subsistence societies that the US extirpated prior to the establishment of parks. Please compare how fortuitous we are to be where we are instead of being a developing country elsewhere in today's world.
Right.
And
no,
I
think
want to preface that question with, it's now probably 4 a.m. where she is, so.
No. Well, I'm not gonna, you know, no, I mean, he's the person that asked that, he or she is obviously very, very well informed and much more of an expert than I am. I actually, yes, that is exactly right. Like, I mean, it's, you know, if you were to compare, oh, well, like X percentage, I mean, we have always been blessed, I mean, geographically. So we have a lot of land, and even, you know, even still, like, when protecting this land often, you know, historically has been a fight often at the local level, because, you know, people there have wanted to use it as a resource. So there's always that friction between, you know, economic, you know, jobs and protection. And though, and I think that that's something that both the State Department and also the National Park Service are trying to do, is like show the economic impact of what they do. So like the National Park Service, you know, like the tourist revenues like that are generated. And so, but with that said, you know, it's a very difficult challenge, because especially in lesser developed where people, you know, like people have a lot less. So, and once again, a lot of it comes from the people that are there. It's like, you know, so to the extent that we can, whether it be, you know, individuals and organizations in the U.S. as well as the State Department, we have an Environment, Science, Technology, Health office there to support. But I think that goes back to like the Office of International Affairs and the consultation and technical training. You know, they can respond when asked on different things. And you saw quite a long list of, I think, Chinese parks, because Zion has a Chinese park, and that's something that they've been working with the Chinese government on. But, you know, yes, there's many challenges.
Yeah, we actually had Chinese National Park Service folks here a couple of years in a row to work with us on national park training. So that was really cool.
Yes,
well,
it's something
I want to open it up for any last questions that anyone might have before we
Does anyone
conclude?
have any suggestions of places that they've encountered, like national park sites that have a connection? No.
I think that this is Natalie. I'll turn my video on. I think that the place I went to, Cape Perpetua, is that a national park or is it an Oregon State Park? That was amazing.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Yeah, today I came across, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say it's like Central Coast in Oregon. It was just breathtaking.
Yeah.
And we're getting a lot in the chat right now.
Yes, and Glacier Waterton. I went to the Glacier Park, but not the other side. And thank you for that. And I learned that there's Roosevelt Campobello International Park, and it's the only one it's in Canada, but it's co-owned and managed by the U.S. and Canada. And it's President Roosevelt's summer getaway. And then I saw the Nicodemus one, but I actually almost went there. We went a little further east, so it was a very interesting history. I definitely need to learn more about that.
Yeah,
so thank you for.
I actually was the person who went there. I guess I turned off my video. And I was actually shocked because, one, it was very hard to find. There were very few signs toward it, and it's very, very, very underfunded. But it has this wonderful story of this African-American community right after slavery that got homesteads in Kansas. And I think it's the sort of thing, one of the things I really like about the national park system is their histories. And
yes.
And this is really a neat one. Very unusual.
Yeah, no, good for it's not many people, I don't know the stats, but they actually do like a list every year of visitation. I definitely think that's one of the lesser visited ones, because it is a little bit off the, the beaten.
I was the first person there in 2 days.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So we went to one park, Fort Bowie, that you have to hike in unless you have mobility issues. And I think we were like 20 that day. So I don't think we've ever, wow, that is like, that's a record, because we've always, 10, 20, 30, like in a day. But
Bob, you have a question before we wrap up?
Well, more of a suggestion. When I first came on this program and saw the redwoods behind you in your virtual background, and I guess the hour that we're doing this, I thought of a national park ranger talk and how much I missed that. And I just wondered if some of the national park units were to put a ranger in front of a campfire at this hour for that kind of program, I think a lot of Americans and a lot of internationals would watch it.
Yes, there's a ranger in Biscayne, and he's a storyteller, like kind of like he's been like the equivalent like a moth story. And he also does it with music. So that with a fellow, I'll send the link. I don't know. I think there's a YouTube link. I mean, he has done it live too. I forget, he did it on it was an occasion. Like for example, Public Lands Day is coming up. So he's definitely done that. and it's very fascinating because he tells a lot of it his personal story, and then you have the musical accompaniment and things like that. So it won't, I'll think about other ways. And the parks are doing a lot of virtual programming, though I have not seen that. That is an interesting, you know, to kind of recapture like the evening ranger experience. And that is something that I felt like my visits would make it to an entirely different level if I had interaction with a ranger. Like you get that much more out of it through the, you know, that kind of, that professional that's able to kind of give you the interpretation. Like you come away with a better appreciation. But I will send the link to Utah Diplomacy. He's actually, he's called the Traveling Ranger. And it was fascinating because he also had the idea. I mean, other national parks have done this, but they've done citizenship ceremonies at national parks, which I think is an amazing idea. And he kind of brought that to Biscayne, so he's quite impressive. And he has some beautiful photos. So I will send that.
All right, well, it's 8 p.m. our time and it's 4 a.m. for Christine.
Yes.
So we'll definitely wrap things up. Thank you guys so much for joining us for this event. If you enjoyed this lecture, I would really encourage you to listen to Christine's podcast, Expedition National Parks. I just finished listening to the second one of the first season on Pecos National Park, and it was a lot of fun learning about it alongside your kids. They were just as excited as I was. So it was really great in a time when we can't travel as much necessarily, to be able to still listen and learn the history of these national parks alongside you and your kids. So that was great. I also want to thank Kelly for joining us as a facilitator, and Ambassador John Price and Marcia Price for providing the support for us to continue this lecture series. Thank you to all the participants who took time from their Tuesday afternoon to join us. And I really hope that you enjoyed this lecture and learned something as well. I would also just like to conclude by saying that there will be an email sent to all participants of this. It's just going to be a 1-minute survey, but I will also include the recording of this lecture if you guys want to share it or watch it again. So thank you all and have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone.